And the trouble that we have in our modern day world is that often the stresses that we're facing, we can't fight really physically, right? We can't just like put our boxing gloves on and beat it down, nor can we run away. We might then find ourselves living in a constant state of stress response.
We are a bit immune to our own stress levels. You know, like it's our baseline. Our baseline could be up here. So when you're asked by your doctor, do you feel stressed? And you go, well, no, actually, I'm okay.
Right.
But I'm okay, I'm all right. But it's because we've absorbed and have this high baseline that we're just used to.
Welcome to Midlife Unfiltered, a podcast about unapologetically embracing the season of me as we live the lives we want in midlife and beyond. I'm Anita McLachlan.
I'm Webb. We're here to make some noise, say hell no to outdated stereotypes, and hell yes to living life on our terms. So, welcome to this episode of Midlife Unfiltered. How are you, Anita?
I'm well, thanks, Erica. I am really excited for this chat because it's something that I think we should all be more aware of, because in the disruption, stress is a big thing. Stress is a big thing in life, but more so in the disruption, I think.
Yeah, that's it. We're going to be talking about stress and the nervous system in today's episode. And one of the reasons that I really like this topic is because none of us are strangers to being told that we need to manage our stress. But it's such a incomplete piece of advice that we get thrown often. And I want to talk about this so that we can make it a little bit less impossible to feel like we can do something with that information and actually see the opportunities to, manage our stress without having to like blow up our lives. Because I think that's what it sometimes feels like, right? This idea that, you need to manage your stress feels a little bit like we have to somehow make all the stressful things in our lives disappear. And that is,
Stressful.
I'm going to argue, impossible. And yes, exactly, adds to our stress because it's like, well, hang on, I can't quit my job. I can't, stop doing these things that make the household run. So what am I left with? So I'm hoping that we'll sort of dispel, I guess, some of the myths around that. And the reason that we want to have this conversation is if you're listening to, this episode, hopefully you've tuned into the earlier part of this season where we were having conversations with some of our women's health experts. And whilst there was some variation, I guess, and variance in where they put their emphasis and the things that they talked about, one thing that was completely consistent across the board was that stress is really disruptive and that stress accounts for a lot of the more challenging things that we might experience in midlife. But again, it can feel like such a mystery. What do I do with that? What do I do with that? Because life is sometimes just outright stressful. And the stress, speaking of this, the disruption, the stress can sometimes blindside you and it can sometimes come out of nowhere. And it's not something that you can just be like, well, I've opted out of stress now, so don't be bringing any stress near me. It doesn't really work like that. So we're going to have that conversation. All right.
Yeah.
Ready?
It'll be so good. Yeah. Bring it on, Erica. You're the nervous system stress girl. So over to you.
Yeah. Look, and I want to start this conversation, I guess, as like this is the kind of work I do, right? I help people with this sort of stuff. And I am a human with a oftentimes fairly stressful life. So what I don't want this episode to feel like is me sitting on a pedestal pretending that I have answers and no problems. Right? That would be hilarious. But it is not the truth. I navigate this stuff in real time every day for myself. And so it's coming from a place of, I guess my intellectual understanding of a topic that I have, trained in. But it's also coming from the realities of being a midlife woman with certain stresses, right? So I wanted to put that out in right at the beginning. So when we're having a conversation about stress, I think it's always worth doing a little bit of stress 101 of like, well, what is stress? Like, what does that word mean? And stress, I think the best place to start with this is to talk about the fact that stress is a response, and a stressor or a stressor, wherever you want to put the emphasis there, is the thing that kind of triggers a stress response.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is generally not, a set of things that will be universally stress inducing or cause exactly the same type of stress. But it is there's definitely some common ones like financial stress, loss, grief, changing roles and responsibilities, being laid off of work, being late for something. Like there are things that we find stressful, but the stressor and the stress are two different things. And so what will make someone feel stressed and have a stress response is the brain's decision that that thing that happened is a threat to your
Mm-hmm.
survival in some way. And that might be your actual physical survival, right? So it might be a threat to life. And we think of that in terms of, we often hear the example of like, being stalked by a tiger, right? And the stress response that results from that is we are, resourced to run away from that tiger. We are resourced to flee from that stressor. But it could also be things that threaten our identity. And we've talked about, identity before. It could be things that threaten our sense of safety within our world. So it's this notion of a threat isn't just a threat to our, lives. It is a threat to all the elements of our life. And we're all really familiar with the feelings of stress. Like, what do you feel when you get stressed, Anita? What are the top kind of signals of like, oh, I'm having a stressful moment here?
Yeah, the whole energy level just, goes through the roof. I feel my heart beating faster and my body I feel like I need to explode out of my skin almost,
Yeah, which is exactly what it's for, right?
Yeah.
Those physiological responses are literally so that you can not necessarily explode out of your skin, but take
Get
off,
out of there.
right?
Yeah, get out of
Fight,
there.
run, do what you need to do to resolve that stressor or to make that thing go away. And so we're all really familiar with those feelings. It's the increased heart rate, it's the anxiety, it's the, digestion that stops. And so maybe, an aching tummy and things like that. It's the increased heart rate. It's that feeling of like, the buzzing energy of just like, I need to, And the trouble that we have in our modern day world is that often the stresses that we're facing, we can't fight really physically, right? We can't just like put our boxing gloves on and beat it down, nor can we run away because it might be a work deadline that we can't run from or physically fight off. It might be an ill family member that, again, we can't run from and we can't fight. So there are things and realities about our, I guess, modern day stress, but also midlife stress that we have to be really mindful of, I think, and really honest about. So I guess that's where we want to start, right? Is that there is this stress response in our body and we all know what it feels like. The challenge that we have in midlife, and I think in just modern life in general, is that when those stresses are not resolvable, because it's the sick parent, it's the, changing roles and responsibilities as children move out of home, which I guess is a little bit different, but it's the, redundancy at work, it's the financial pressures, it's inflation, it's all of these things that we can't necessarily resolve and we can't run from and we can't do whatever, is that we might then find ourselves living in a constant state of stress response. And so when the doctor says to you, you really need to get a handle on your stress, what they're really saying is you can't live in a stress response and be well and thrive.
Yeah. And I think too that we are a bit immune to our own stress levels. Like it's our baseline. Our baseline could be up here. So when you're asked by your doctor, well, do you feel stressed? And you go, well, no, actually, I'm okay.
I'm fine.
But I'm okay. I'm all right. But it's because we've absorbed and have this high baseline that we're just used to. And so
I think we don't feel like we have a choice.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
really, as you were talking about all those stress responses, Erica, I was thinking about something that I remind myself of often and have in conversations with others is that as a human living now in this culture and in this society, we have a really ancient brain that is living in a modern time. And I think that gap, of
Yeah.
is it, I don't know, millions of years? How
Mm.
many, how many zeros there are attached to that? I'm not an anthropologist, I don't remember. But I think that's where a lot of the complexity and the difficulty is to understand, because we hear that talk about, oh, the tiger and it's a safety thing and you're running. And part of me goes, I don't understand that because that's not of
Yeah.
my world. But
And it hasn't been for such a long time. Yeah.
and it hasn't been. But when you put it like you did in the context of everyday life, that we have an old brain in a new context, and that's what we're grappling with that creates the stress. I
Yeah.
get that.
I think that's a
So,
beautiful way of putting it. Mm.
yeah, that's how it makes more sense to me. Anyway, maybe it will for others. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
And the equivalent, yeah, and there probably isn't really an equivalent, I don't think there is an equivalent unless, you're running down the road and there's a aggressive dog off lead that chases you. Like maybe that's the equivalent, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And once that dog is under control or restrained or you've gotten away from it, then you're no longer stressed out about that because the stress is gone. But one of the things that I think is often overlooked when it comes to the stress response is how we talk to ourselves. Um,
Mm,
this is something else that you just reminded me of that I really wanted to make sure we talked about, is that we think of stress as being an external thing, right? Well, there's not enough money in the bank account, or there's too many things on my to-do list, or there's too many sick people around me, or whatever. We rarely stop to think about the fact that the criticism that we level at ourselves is also a source of stress. Your brain does not know the difference.
mm,
If somebody was, if I was in that room with you, Anita, and I came and I tapped on your shoulder and I was like, who do you think you are? You're not good enough to be here doing this. All the crappy things we might say to ourselves, that would be really stressful. You'd be like, what is this terrible person doing
mm,
in my
mm.
space telling me these horrible things? But we do it to ourselves, and we do it
We
to
do.
ourselves, and we don't recognize the impact that that has. So in this modern world that we have, we're dealing with the external stresses, our internal responses to that, but then
Mhm.
we're also dealing with the reality that some of our stress comes from our lack of compassion for ourselves, our lack of kindness for ourselves, and all of those filters and expectations and how we feel like we fall short of them. They are sources of stress as well. So
Mm,
I want to plant that little seed as
mm,
something that's really important to consider in midlife, especially
mm,
because we've been, throughout this season talking about, and last season too, actually, talking about how we start to break those things down, right? And question them and like, do I want to subscribe to, I think we called it the great expectations in season 1. Do we want to subscribe to those things anymore?
mm.
So the stress can come from inside, and certainly our how we are relating to ourselves is a really big part of that.
Yep.
I guess the two really big messages that I want to get across in this episode, other than that, right, other than the internal criticism piece being really big deal, is that managing stress doesn't always have to be about eliminating stress, and I'll say more about that for sure.
Mhm.
And I guess these are kind of the same thing. But so managing your stress isn't always about eliminating your stressor. And the key to I'm going to just call this a healthy nervous system is to be able to move between states. So we think sometimes of managing your stress as being like, just imagine like a flat line, right? If I am managing my stress, then I just am never perturbed. I'm just this easy, chill, easygoing person. I mean, that would be nice. But the reality is that a healthy nervous system, a functional nervous system, is one that recovers, one that moves between states. Because that nervous system response to get you into a state to fight off, the loose dog or the aggressive boss or whatever it is, that reaction is incredibly functional. It's necessary. It is good in a lot of situations. What's not so good is when we get stuck there. And so the actual goal of managing your stress is to be able to move between states and not be stuck in a state of constant fight, flight, or freeze, which is where we are, in I must deal with an imminent threat. We don't want to live there because that's when we get ourselves into all sorts of trouble. But we also don't want to assume that in order to be regulated and healthy within our nervous system, that we must always be calm, because that's incorrect. And that is just not even possible in a human life, right? So it's about recovery. It's about being able to move between states. And to an extent, it's about being able to do that at will. So we know that if we have got a situation where we're facing stress that is not currently resolvable, then we can't wait for the stress to resolve to be able to shift our nervous system state from one that is must fight this stressor to one that is I can rest and digest and be safe in the world right now. Yeah, we have to have ways of choosing that. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about managing stress. Does that make sense?
It does. And is that where the nervous system piece comes into the puzzle? Because, yeah.
So essentially your nervous system, when we talk about your nervous system, we're talking about the combination of your brain, spinal cord, and all the nerves that kind of branch off from there. And what your nervous system does is it's constantly, its main job really is to say, are we safe? Are we safe? Is there a threat to this human being? And that threat, like we talked about, could be a physical threat. It could be an emotional threat. It could be a threat that, means that you'll be excluded from or banished from your people. It could be any kind of threat. And so the way that our nervous system responds is in direct response to that assessment. Are we safe? The anxiety is a direct response to that assessment of am I safe? The anger, to some extent, is also that feeling in your body of like, I must run, I must fight, I must like throw something at someone. That is a response to that question of am I safe? And it's all happening subconsciously. Doesn't tend to have an awful lot of conscious thought contributed to it. The thought tends to come afterwards. There's this beautiful saying from a woman called Deb Dana, and she says, the mind narrates what the nervous system knows. And so our thoughts tend to come after our nervous system has made an assessment. And then we go, well, why am I feeling so stressed? Oh, it must be because that person said that awful thing to me, right? So the nervous system is always doing that constantly making this assessment. Even now as we talk to each other, subconsciously, both of us will be looking for signs in each other's faces that we're not being rejected. And if I think I pick up on that sign, my body will be like, holy shit, Anita's mad at me, right? Must do something to make her happy, must do something to repair. So it's happening all the time. And so when we think about how we're going to manage our stress then, it's actually about learning ways to tell our nervous system, we're safe. We're safe. I'm okay. Right now is not the time we need to fight. I know that thing's still happening. I know that parent's still ill. I know that bank account's still low. I know that, all of those things are still true. But right now in this moment, I'm choosing to recognize the safety inherent in now. And so it's this signaling to the nervous system, a choice of signaling to the nervous system that says right now is not the time to fight, essentially, right?
And how do we do that, Erica? Is it creating that space, like that time space where we can then assess? Or because as you said earlier, the thought comes afterwards. It's almost like the emotional response subconsciously kicks off.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? Have you got some clues?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you just said is like a really important part of that. There is a chemical response within the body, the neurochemicals and the hormones that kind of cascade in response to a stressor or an assessment of stress are very real. And so we can't just be like, well, I choose not to be stressed now, right? It doesn't work like that because it's happened. It's in your body. And so, you know, if we go back to that example of a dog was chasing you, right? It's an aggressive dog. It's slipped its lead. Its owner can't get control of it. You are going to feel the surge of that stress response, right? Your heart's going to beat faster. You're going to feel your muscles, you know, fueled and ready to go. They're going to be ready to run. You cannot just decide that you're not going to feel like that anymore when that dog is biting at your heels, right? So in that scenario, the way that that stress would be resolved is we would run. We'd take off, right? And that we would use up what our body has given us to flee that situation. Or if we couldn't, then, you know, after the fact, we'd have a moment of like, oh my God, like I did, you wouldn't believe what just happened to me. And we would release the resources that our body gave us to fight that thing. So part of how we do this is finding other ways to do what's called completing the stress cycle. So if you think of stress as having, you know, a beginning and an end, that's what's so problematic about our modern day stress is it doesn't really resolve. But in our, you know, if you think about our old brains, the old situations that we had to deal with, they resolved. The threat left. The threat departed. The herd of tigers moved on, or whatever it was, right? And so then we could rest, we could eat, we could procreate, we could do all those things that are much easier when we're not stressed. But when we don't have that resolution, then we have to make ways to discharge, essentially, the resources that our body's given us to fight the stress that we can't fight through running away. So we do that by moving our bodies. You know, going for a walk, literally, can be the thing. We do that by talking to people, whether it's a friend or a therapist, right? We do that by expending some of the that comes with the stress. We do that by breathing. You know, there's a reason why breathing exercises are so important and so topical right now, because breathing is one of the ways that we can literally physically move that stress out of our body. We can do that through creativity, painting something, dancing, singing in the shower. We do it through positive social connections, whether that's, you know, talking with someone about the thing that's stressful, or literally just being in relationship with people that, you know, we value. And I think, you know, if you think about your own situation, I think we all have ways of doing this that feel particularly useful to us. So for me, I walk with a girlfriend and we talk at the same time. That's probably one of my most powerful sort of nervous system hygiene practices, right? Because every day I give myself the opportunity to physically and emotionally expel.
Get it out. Yeah.
Do you know what you do? Like maybe you don't use that language, but do you know what you do?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'd never thought about our body creating that response and then us having to release it. So thank you for that. I've never thought of it that way, but now that I know it's a release, that's really helpful. So thank you. It just gives it a bit more clarity, you know, in why I do what I do and why some things work and some things don't. So yeah, I've tried quite a few things over the years, but for me, number one is breath work. Like it is all in the breathing. And you introduced me to that. So thank you. Another gift that you've given me. I didn't realize the power that was in breath. And the other thing is it's free and it's always available.
Yes.
We don't have to prep for it.
No. Yeah. There's no requirement to be like, well, I have to get this outfit on and I have to get
the
this
right
particular
shoes.
location.
That's right. No, it is there. And it's almost like, you know, it's in us to use. Like we made this way. And I think it's a tool.
100%.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. So that's my go-to.
And you know what? It's two things that I think of when you say that. One is when we talk about the nervous system looking So the nervous system, right? Number one job, keep this person safe. Keep them alive, essentially, but keep them safe. And so the nervous system is going to scan for threat, right? It's constantly doing that. That's why we actually have a negativity bias, because your brain is always on the lookout for like, what's bad? What could hurt me, right? That is hardwired. But what we can do is we can anchor ourselves in signs of safety. So that's why gratitude works. It's a sign of safety. That's why breathing works. It's a sign of safety, because you cannot be facing down that rabid dog and breathing calmly. Doesn't work, right? So your breath is probably physiologically the most powerful thing that you can do for stress, because it is like, it's the direct phone number to your nervous system's center, right?
Speed dial.
Speed dial. It's like, how do I get my nervous system on speed dial? I breathe. We can have all kinds of impacts on our nervous system based on how we breathe. And so when we breathe slowly, when we breathe at a rhythm that signals to our body, well, I'm not under imminent threat, because if I was, I couldn't breathe like this. It's literally like a little in the brain that says, oh, we must be okay. Great to know, right?
Yeah.
So there's a good reason why that works. And I think that it can be a little bit dependent on what's going on. So if we've had a really, like, have you ever been in a situation where you've almost been in a car accident?
Yes.
Yes. I'm like, has anyone not? And you have that like real surge in your body, and your heart is beating, your hands are shaking. And, we can deal with that in lots of different ways. If we can't physically stop the car and get out of it, then we might make a phone call, right? Hopefully on hands-free and whatever, but we might make a phone call and we talk it out, because we need to somehow dissipate the feelings in our body. We might like deep breathe as we sit at the traffic light, right? Or if we are close to our destination, maybe we literally, stop the car and we shake our limbs, or we go for a little run, or we go for a walk. They are all, I mean, I can feel that in my body as I talk about it, because it's a discharge of the energy that your body has released to help you deal with the thing that's at hand. And it's almost like, did your kids ever do those experiments where you add vinegar to bicarb soda and
Yes,
it like
yes.
fizzles
Rockets.
up, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
imagine if you put a
Volcanoes.
lid on that before it had a chance to come out the top, right? So you've added your vinegar and then you quickly put a lid on top. It's going to keep fizzing and bubbling under the surface. It's got nowhere to go, right? It's not as easy for it to dissipate if it doesn't have an escape. And so we're the same. No one added vinegar, but we're the same. It's the same kind of thing. If you think of it as being like a cascade of reactions that have to play out, they have to play out to their end point. Then it sort of gives you a clue of like, well, what could I do? And we want to do it obviously in a constructive way, because some of the examples that we could obviously think of can be really quite destructive to ourselves and to other people. So we want to think about channeling it in a way that is obviously beneficial to us. But yeah, movement, connection with another human that you trust, and breathing would probably be, three of the most accessible. And it doesn't have to be going for a run either. Like you'll pretty much never see me run unless I'm on the basketball court chasing a ball. But walking, I do really slow mindful yoga. That for me is one of my releases. Oftentimes it's things that we're already doing, but I think it can be really beneficial too to sort of shift how we think about why that's so helpful. And if we recognize, every day, if I give myself the opportunity to kind of complete this stress resolution cycle, I know that tomorrow when I wake up, those stresses aren't gone, but I'm giving my body a chance to recalibrate before I have to face it again.
Yeah. So that's bringing up a couple of things for me. So it's the in the moment, how do I deal with this stress, this stressor? And then there's the what do I do day to day to maybe help me be either reduce that baseline down so that, if it builds during the day, it's not going to reach a point that's, destructive to me or others. And I can't help but think that, chronic illness and lots of things that come from keeping that inside and not having it released.
Yeah.
So, and getting back to the breathing thing, and I'm sorry if this takes you off on a different tangent that you weren't expecting right now, but I'm now at the point where I've done every morning I start my day sitting on my yoga mat. At the moment it's beautiful because it's coming into warmer weather, so the sun's in my face, which is something that immediately brings joy to me. But it's that starting the day just really mindful and relaxing and doing that meditation and listening to something and breathing beautifully. And if I don't get that now, it's to the point where I've been doing it probably for over 6 months now, most of the time, not every single day, but 80% of the time. If I don't have it now, if I don't start my day that way, then I know that
It's not as good.
it's not as good. It's just not as good. It takes the edge off, or I just don't feel, and I don't feel whole. Like it's almost like part of me is missing too when I don't do it. But it certainly is a great way to start my day and to bring that baseline down. So
Yeah, and actually that's yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Finish what you were going to say.
No, you're right. I hope I haven't sabotaged your train of thought and where you were leading the conversation. But
no, I think it actually leads us to a really helpful place. What you're talking about makes me think of a couple of things, and hopefully I'll remember both. But I guess the first thing it makes me think of is the value of having both preemptive or preventative, I guess, for want of a better term, practices, which is what you're talking about, and also having kind of responsive practices, right? So there are things that we can do that help us, like you said, sort of lower the baseline. And then there are things that we do, and they could be the same things, but there are things that we do in response to a stress that is happening in the moment. And they both are really important. So there's one really cool way of thinking about stress, which is called the window of tolerance. And the idea of the window of tolerance, and if you Google that, you'll get an image, which can be really helpful. But the idea of the window of tolerance is that every human on earth has a window of nervous system activation or arousal that is ideal for being okay, right? Doesn't mean that we're stress free, but it means that when something comes at us, we deal with it and we, carry on. And not in the kind of like we deal with it because we're so weathered at life, but like we're properly dealing with it, right? We're recovering. We're going through that cycle of stress and recovery, etc. And then, if we are under aroused or under stimulated as far as our nervous system goes, we will be in like a frozen state, and that's sort of like a depressive sort of state. And if we are overstimulated or over aroused in our nervous system, that is what we would typically think of as a stress response. Now, the cool thing is that when we have those preemptive practices, it can help us broaden our window in general and make it so that we've started in our day a little more in our window than out, right? So we haven't started our day already riding the crest of that upper edge. We are a bit more resourced. We're like, I got room here. Some things can come at me today and I'm not going to be kind of overloaded by them. But then once we are at that point where perhaps there's just like too many things and then the next person looks at you wrong and you're like, are you freaking kidding? You're done, right? Like you're just like the lid is off and it's all over. It's in that moment where we become more resilient if we're able to respond with some nervous system regulation tools, to choose, if it's necessary, to kind of become more regulated. Because sometimes it's actually really beneficial not to be, right? If you are facing an aggressor or some asshole boss who's, just like completely out of line, you want to have a little bit of energy behind you to stand your ground and to, be able to respond. So it's not a bad thing. But if you're in a situation where you're like literally somebody just like bumped me at the supermarket and I feel like I want to scream at them, then we might be like, okay, but maybe that's not really what I want to do. So now maybe is the opportunity where I have some choice to then turn to my nervous system regulation tools to say, hey, nervous system, it's not actually what it appears. I am not actually unsafe right now, right? I'm choosing to show you that I am safe, that this is okay. And so I'm going to take a few deep breaths and I'm going to remind myself that I'm okay. And I'm going to signal to my nervous system that things are okay.
Mm.
And I like to think of it like a conversation.
Mm.
That's how this is how I conceptualize it. It's like my nervous system is always trying to look after me, always. But sometimes it might be like that overactive fire alarm that's like, oh, somebody's making toast. Better let you know, right? And you're like, no, it's fine. They're just making toast. I'm going to take a few deep breaths so that you know that this isn't an emergency. So there's both, right? I think it's really important when we're thinking about managing stress. It's about, have some practices that are incorporated into your life, whether it's daily or, every other day, whether it's the walk, evening walk, morning walk, whether it's the yoga, whether it's the breath practice, whether it's journaling or meditation, something that makes you feel more resourced, because that's the goal, right? The goal is to feel more resourced. And then also have your little collection of tools that when the shit does hit the fan and you're like, oh my gosh, like my body's responding like I'm being chased by a rabid dog, but like somebody just looked at me funny. Then you have some tools at your disposal. Or I'm facing the fact that there is this ill family member and I can't do anything to change that. But it's a gift to myself and my well-being to at least take the time to step, we're not ignoring the fact that that's true, but I'm going to set aside time to just spend some time with my body and my nervous system and myself to at least have a moment of refuge from that, from a nervous system point of view, if nothing else, right? So, I don't think that took us off in a different, a terribly different direction. But does that sort of answer your question around the role of those practices like you were talking about with the breathing and the yoga and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm even thinking a good old-fashioned cup of tea, like
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and that as a practice in itself, whether it's a ceremony that you do often or whether it's just something you do to break
Yeah.
the thoughts that are going through your head that is creating the stress. It's like that's the other thing I'll do is I'll often just get up, go and make a cup of tea and come back, like it's just to break the circuit somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it really is helpful to call out what you're doing. Oh, here I am. I always like this as a tool because I think it makes it more real. It makes it a bit more tangible. Here I am making myself a cup of tea as an act of love, right? As an act of
Self-compassion.
reminding myself and my body and my nervous system that right now in this moment I am okay.
Yeah.
And because sometimes I think otherwise the getting up to make the tea, we can be like, oh, why can't I cope with this? Why am I so weak? Why am I this? Why am I that? Nobody else seemed to be bothered. Everybody else is coping. We can get into that self-criticism. And like I said at the beginning, self-criticism is a sign of, is a threat marker, I guess, for the nervous system. Just like somebody speaking over your shoulder to yourself that way, you are generating your own threat on the inside. And when I say that, I'm also really want to make sure I marry that up with reminding everyone, myself included, that the antidote to that is self-compassion.
Yeah.
So because sometimes when I say that, I think, oh gosh, there was a time in my life where I'd be like, well, I can't stop the criticism. So I guess I'm just breaking myself, right? Like I guess I'm just destined to be in this constant state of stress. But self-compassion doesn't actually require that you completely eliminate that inner mean girl, right? All it asks of us, and I say all, but I recognize that it's not always easy, but all that it asks for us is to recognize, wow, this is hard. I'm having a moment of struggle, and that's human. And I am still allowed to treat myself with kindness, even though this is how I'm feeling right now. So even if you are like, I can easily put myself in that position of like, but self-criticism that's how I operate, right? My invitation would be, can you make self-compassion your primary go-to practice? It is the one that will change your life. I believe that with all of my
Good.
heart. Yeah.
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 100%. Yeah. And talk to yourself like you would to somebody else, like your friend, so
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. What would I say to my friend if she was feeling this way, or someone in my family? And, that's the compassion you want to show yourself.
Yeah. And I think that can be hard sometimes as well in some ways. I just want to kind of like play the other side of that is sometimes when we have high expectations of ourselves, we do have them of other people too. And so we think everybody, maybe just needs to pull their socks up a little bit. I've certainly had periods of time where I've felt like that. And so I think, I'm just checking my notes here, and I'm looking at one of the things that I wrote down was, why is this particularly relevant in midlife? And I think it is because we are questioning those things, right? We're questioning, what's the narrative that says I need to be this productive, flawless woman?
That
And maybe that's
expectation.
maybe they're the expectations that I'm also placing on others. And so maybe when I ask myself, how would I treat a friend? I think, well, on the inside, I'd be like, come on, get on with it, But I think it is this invitation in midlife to question like, am I choosing to subscribe to those notions anymore? Or am I not, And so I think that in midlife, whilst we do obviously have all of these stresses that perhaps are quite new, the aging parents, the illness, the changing relationships, a lot of marriage breakdowns, a lot of shifting, parent roles and all that sort of stuff. There is also, without a doubt, that internal reckoning, of, well, what am I going to choose to believe? What am I going to choose to subscribe to? What am I going to choose for myself? And I think that's all tied up in this stress conversation as well.
Yeah.
Which is maybe just another way of looking at it.
Yeah. Different context. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Self-compassion is a huge one, and self-kind as which is your world. We often talk about the world needing more kindness, and it absolutely does. But I also think that it's hard to do that if you don't have it for yourself. So we need to be mindful of that, and that it's not a sign of weakness. That's the other expectation or other, belief that is often in our modern world, is that it's a sign of weakness to take some time out, or to say no to something, or I can't do that, or it doesn't, or to show that you're suffering in some way and being vulnerable, sign of weakness. No, it absolutely isn't. So
The
yeah.
irony is that it's actually often harder to choose the self-compassionate and kind route. It is
Yes,
actually
that is
often much
stronger.
harder. Mm-hmm.
It is. That's where the strength is a lot of the time too, isn't it, Erica? There's strength
Totally.
in self-compassion. Yes.
Because the default, the easy thing is not to do that, because that's the automatic path. So it is actually the strong thing to choose it, because it doesn't come automatically. It doesn't come without effort. And I would argue, and I don't know, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I would argue that our capacity to be kind to others and compassionate at a true kind of level is really only matched by our capacity to do that to ourselves, because we are, we're all kind of the same. And if we can't offer that to ourselves, then we aren't offering it to the world, because there's nothing in you, that doesn't exist in me as well. I mean, we're different, of course, but at our essence. So I think that that's a really, if I had to pick one tool, I would pick self-compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't always feel like the most accessible one. So breath otherwise.
Yeah. Otherwise breath.
But
there's always
otherwise
breath.
or walking. But I mean, I think, if we come back to that question of like, why in midlife, why is this such a topical thing right now? It's because, like, I don't know, I'm getting a real sense of this now at 41. Like, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This is my life. And shit, I don't want to waste that on, just a puddle of stress. And I'm no stranger to stress.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
No, my life is
Yeah.
currently, really quite stressful. And I think that's the thing, right? Is it's like we can be committed to supporting ourselves through stress, Success at that does not require you to move into, a cave in the mountains with no other humans. That would create its own kind of stress. So we have to find ways of managing and navigating this stuff without opting out of real life. And that's probably where it feels hard sometimes as well.
Yeah, and I think too, like we were just talking earlier with Kat and Alex about identity, and this ties so well into that too, because is my response to the stress or what I feel is stressful, how does that align with who I am? So this might be a bit esoteric at this point, but hang in there. But if I when I'm wanting to respond to a particular stress that I'm in, I think midlife is a great opportunity when we are questioning so much about what is happening to us and how we feel on the inside and all the changes, the disruption that's going on. We talked about our values being those anchor points to navigate us forward. And I kind of think that that is woven into this conversation as well, how we manage our stress, how we talk to ourselves. Do I value self-compassion? Do I value me, in all of this?
Yeah.
And if the answer is yes, then absolutely, create the tools in your toolbox to be self-compassionate and to look after you as number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too that if you have explored your values, that exploration is incomplete if you haven't figured out how those values relate to your own relationship with yourself and your body. Because everybody who does their values is going to think about, well, how do my values turn out towards the world, right? How does that mean that I am with other people? How does that mean that I am in my roles and responsibilities and work and whatever? You must turn them towards yourself and say, well, am I giving myself the honesty, the compassion, the kindness, the whatever that I'm saying are the things that are my values? Because if they're not going in, it's incomplete. And that's where I think the value stuff, and perhaps we at some point need to do a whole episode on that, but I think that's where the value stuff really comes to life from the self-care point of view and from the point of view of, like how does that help us regulate and manage stress? It's because you give a shit, right? Like you care enough about this experience that you're having on the inside to turn those values towards you, not just towards everybody else, because you've done that. You did that for the first half of your life. I guarantee it. It is time to turn some of those in, and it will not stop you from turning them out, I promise, but it's going to make the balance feel more right. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, stay on it, please, because I'm thinking that if there was something that in a nutshell really says previous 50 years to where I'm at now and potentially that what I'm thinking maybe the next 50 is that this is a pivotal turning point in our lives where we go from paying attention to the outside and how we respond to the outside and show up on the outside to turning that inwards. This is the pivotal moment. This is the pivotal time in our lives where it's happening. This disruption is happening for a reason. It's happening physiologically within us. It's driven by hormones. It's driven by all sorts of things. And this is the great opportunity that we have. It's the flip from the outside to in. And I think all of these conversations can be related to that. So thank you for sharing that, Jem, because I think that's what we're ultimately talking about in this whole series of the podcast, Erica, is turning those conversations inwards to ourselves, asking the questions of ourselves. How do we respond? How will we manage our stress? It's the inward, turning the focus inward for the answers.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. I want to offer up just a couple of resources for anyone listening who's like, all right, cool, but I want more. There's a book that I really love and I recommend it to people all the time. It's called Burnout. The little subheading is Solve Your Stress Cycle. And it's by two sisters, Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And it is such a good book. It talks a lot about this, necessity of completing the stress cycle. But they speak a lot about all of those societal conditioning things that make that very hard as women to navigate. And so it's particularly around this shedding of expectations, the shedding of, I guess, the things that have gotten us here, and making that conscious choice of like, that's not how I'm doing this anymore. But also having a great amount of compassion for the fact that we're all swimming in that soup, right? That soup of all the expectations and the way that the world has run. So that book I would highly recommend if you're interested in stress and working with your own stress. And there's also a Substack article, Anita, that you sent through to me that I think is really helpful as well, by Marianne Jacobson. So we'll link both of those resources in the show notes because I think they could be really helpful, like next steps and things. And then, I guess one of the things we want to do this season is really throw it back out to all of you listening to say like, okay, what's one thing that I take from this? And I guess I'm going to throw it to you, Anita, since I have done a lot of talking this episode, and just, say what would be that thing for you? Maybe you're already doing it and it just makes you say, wow, I'm so much more committed to that practice perhaps, or maybe it's a shift in the way that you're thinking, or maybe it's something you want to try. Like, what would you sort of take away? What's your big or little glimmer thing that you're taking away from this episode?
I think that the thing I'm taking away is that it's understanding and appreciating that I'm taking so much in as a potential as stress, and that my response inside needs to be released. So that's, being conscious of the need to release, and do that in a way and explore various ways. Like at the moment, I'm really happy with the meditation, breath work, yoga, going for a walk, that kind of release, making a cup of tea. But maybe there's other things that I could be exploring as well. So, or journaling, doing a little bit of that, the letters from love, what would you have me know today? That's another great one to maybe process the stress and get it out, and that's the self-compassion act. That's the self-compassion piece. So I think for me that's what it is. And that's that continual curiosity for exploration, but also keep turning it inwards for me. What do I need? What's going to work for me? And appreciate it from that perspective more and more.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I want to add, and I know we were like, we'll make this a little shorter episode. Sorry, folks, that didn't happen. Whoopsies. I want to just point out one thing is a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of tools have been very calm, right? They've been very sort of zen-like breathing slowly and, going for a stroll and making a cup of tea. Sometimes that release is going to be screaming into the void, right? Like, I think it's important to recognize that there isn't a good, there's no hierarchy here. Sometimes it might be, pushing against a wall, like you wanted to push it over. Sometimes it is literally going to be screaming because that is what you need to do. Sometimes it's going to be writing an angry letter that you never sent. It doesn't have to be clean and tidy and ladylike all the time, right? And so for me, I tend to be more those calm things most of the time, but there are times where it's like all that's going to do the job is to scream this out, or to run on the spot or to punch a pillow. Like there's some level of judgment that seems to come with that, or some level of inner shame that comes with that. Like, I shouldn't need that. And it's like, but what if that is the thing that needs to be released, right? Like, what if you are just bloody angry and you need to have a way to let that out? Like, there are times where it's like, I'm just angry at the world. I'm angry at the structures that have oppressed too many people. I might have to scream about that, right? Like, so I think that that's important to point out too, is if you're sort of listening and you're like, breathing, really? But like, the world's on fire. How's that going to help? It might be that sometimes that release needs to feel angrier at times,
Yeah.
but in a
But
safe
to
way.
do no harm. Yeah, I was about to say, but to do
Exactly.
no harm.
Yeah,
to do no
absolutely. We're
harm.
not going to
Yeah.
scream at people. We're not,
Yeah.
destroying property. I think that we have to remove some of that stigma. Like sometimes that is the thing that needs to be released. And sometimes that might happen with a therapist, right? That might be something that we feel we need some support for, or we might drive somewhere where we're like, okay, now I'm somewhere no one will hear me, or like there might be things that we can do that make that feel a bit safer for us. But I just wanted to point that out, just in case anyone's listening and thinking, does that count? Can I do that? Yes.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
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 And some things are trendy, right? Some things are trendier to explore and
Absolutely.
do. So we don't have to stick to the trendy stuff either.
No, that's it.
Well, thank
Amazing.
you, Erica.
Thank you.
Another
Thanks
great
for asking such
episode.
good questions.
Yeah. So we've got some resources for the girls listening to check out. And there's also our other download, so that if you want to write down some notes from today's podcast session, you can, from the episode, and maybe add those resources into it as a reminder as well to come back to again.
Yeah.
So all that's
And
down below.
Yeah, we'll put it down below, and just, to say it out loud too, in case you don't have a desire to go down to the show notes. To get that download, it's to head to our Substack. So if you just head over to
Yes, our
Substack
new Substack.
and yeah, new Substack, we need to talk about that. I don't think we've said it by name yet. So you want to head to our Substack. So Substack, and then you're just looking for Midlife Unfiltered, and if you sign up, you'll get that resource. And yeah, that's how you'll hear from us if you would like us in your inbox, which we will be sure to make a pleasant experience for everyone.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much for that reminder. Good old Substack. Forgot to mention that because it is so new, right? It is so new.
It is new. We are figuring it out.
Yeah, but it's great. There's lots of great people on Substack, so it's a wealth of wonderful wisdom. I'm really enjoying it over there. So head over there too. Yeah, great. Thanks, Erica.
Awesome. See you soon, Anita.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Midlife Unfiltered. If you loved this episode, you're going to love what's coming next. Be sure you're subscribed on your platform of choice so you don't miss a thing.
We'd also be delighted, and for sure do a little happy dance, if you took the time to leave us a rating and review. Those not only absolutely make our day, but more importantly, it helps other women who may be wanting something more from their midlife to know about us and to listen in as well. You can connect with us on socials too. You'll find links to connect on LinkedIn, Instagram, and email in the show notes.